there is a truth which must out. And Charlotte, with her insatiably curious mind, she says at one point, I was more curious than frightened. And I think that's the triumph and that's the energy, right? Is if we can keep our curiosity just a bit ahead of our fear, we're going to be okay.
I'm Michael Tamlin, CEO of Rakuten Kobo. This is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is the actor, playwright, and novelist Ann-Marie MacDonald. Her new novel, Fayne, is a work of historical fiction about a young person, Charlotte, her father, Henry, a painting of Charlotte's late mother, an infant brother, and a secret that lies between them all. Or at least, that's my spoiler-free description of this wonderful novel. Ann-Marie MacDonald, welcome to Kobo.
Thank you so much, Michael.
It is so great to have you here. It is so great to have a new book by Ann-Marie MacDonald in our hands. That's something that, the interval between these is not insignificant sometimes. Is sort of the gestation process around a new novel for you a long thing, or is it just there's work that happens in between?
Well, I think it is a combination. Gestation is a really important part of things. I think that there is a time arc during which a whole lot can happen in the psyche. The flotsam and jetsam, and all the little bits of diamonds and pearls that float by, and it takes time for those to settle and be recognized and sifted through. So I think time works its own kind of magic, and I do tend to work in tandem on projects. I worked on Fayne, for the better part of 6 years, but on and off with a play called Hamlet 911, which is actually running as we speak at the Stratford Festival.
Mm-hmm.
In true post-pandemic style, projects which were to have come to fruition sequentially in an orderly fashion are, of course, simultaneous. We should be so lucky to have these problems. However, yeah. But yes, the gestation process is really important. I also, once I know that I have a character or an image or a time and a place, some kind of, it's usually an image. Once I know that it's alive, then I like to take time to investigate that picture. And that directs my research. I ask a lot of questions anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but
good, because I'm going to come back to that research in a moment. This new novel is called Fayne, and it starts with kind of a tourist brochure, the kind that we might glance over if we visited a historical estate on the border of Scotland and England. But I'll ask you, what is or what was Fayne?
Well, Fayne is, in a sort of a tongue-in-cheek way, it's referred to as a stateless home. And it's a mansion. It's a lonely mansion on a windswept moor, which I like to say, it's almost redundant. Is there any other kind? But it's lonely. It's stark. It is, for me, one of the most extraordinarily beautiful kinds of landscapes in the world. So you have this big, lonely manor house. And yes, it begins with this brochure. And I modeled that on the literature that accompanies visits to stately homes, in the UK. And Fayne, of course, is my creation, as is the estate that straddles the border between England and Scotland, such that it is in both and neither. It is two things at the same time. So this is all completely fictional. And Fayne is a name that came to me, Fayne. And then I thought, why that? And I thought, well, that's a gift of the fairy, because Fae, the word Fae is in there, which of course has to do with fairy. Fayne means I would fain, in the Shakespearean sense, I would fain have a glass of mead. Thank you so much. And then also Fayne means to pretend something. I think you feign, you feigned amusement. You weren't at all amused.
Mhm.
So there are lots and lots of different puns and evocations in that word, and it's playful, and it's one syllable, and it seemed to me to be a portal to some place, as indeed it was.
And all of these meanings and the various shades of them manifest themselves over the course of the book. Before we get into that, I'd like to ask you to introduce a few of the characters. I'm trepidatious about letting the audience know who's going to figure in the story and how much, because the voices that we get to hear have a lot to do with the drive of the narrative as it shifts from one person to the next. But let's keep it simple and talk about Charlotte and her father, Lord Henry.
Well, at the beginning of the book, the year is 1887. And Charlotte, the Honorable Charlotte Bell, is a precocious 12-year-old, brilliant, bursting with energy kid who has been raised by her adoring widowed father, Baron Lord Henry Bell, 17th Baron of the DC de Fayne. He is a doting father. He's a bird fancier. He has very sensitive eyes, and he devotes the better part of his time number one is Charlotte because he adores her. And number two, a close second, is not only the living birds on the moor, but really primarily bits of birds that he is reconstructing from discarded ornithological specimens. And he lovingly reconstructs these dead birds. And he does this. He has nocturnal habits. His eyes are so sensitive, such that for him, his day starts around dinner time. And he has to go to bed during the day because the sun is too much for him. So he has also protected his daughter, who has grown up being exposed to very, very few people, nobody outside a very small household of servants and family retainers, owing to a condition, a mysterious capital C condition, which has kept her confined to the estate, within whose bounds she finds herself very free. The moor is her playground. And there's an old, ancient man of all work who has been her mentor thus far, but she craves more than anything to go to school. And on the occasion of her 12th birthday, her father surprises her with a tutor, which is unconventional in the extreme, tutors being reserved for young gentlemen, not young ladies. So that's really the best day of her life, is close to the beginning of the book. And thereby hangs a lot of tales.
A lot of tales.
Yeah, she grows up in the shadow of this grand portrait of her beautiful mother, the American heiress, Marie. Lady Marie, whom she has grown up knowing died in childbed of her, Charlotte, and the beloved deceased infant Charles, who is the baby figured in the portrait being held by the American heiress, Lady Marie. She's the Bostonian Irish-American daughter of a captain of industry, a self-made Irish-American captain of industry, who essentially, brought his daughter over to the continent with the intention of snagging a titled British aristocrat, preferably penniless, because that's the kind of match that's made in heaven. Mm-hmm. Rich American heiress, penniless blue blood. And it is a love match at the outset.
Charlotte is also something of a descendant of Ada Lovelace, the computing pioneer, the fossil hunter, Mary Anning, Mary Somerville, the Scottish woman for whom apparently the word scientist was invented as an improvement on the idea of a man of science. How much were you reaching into the history of women in science and those figures as you were starting to shape this character?
Oh, well, that's one of the most exciting and fun aspects of my work on this book. I just can't get enough of science and the history of science and medicine and the history of medicine and the history of wellness. What do we think wellness is? What is wholeness? What is healing? Who needs to be cured? Why? How do we define one another? And the history of women and medicine, not just women as practitioners of medicine, but women as subjects of medicine. And there is a checkered, colorful, heavily textured, if not positively tragic and horrific history to be tapped there, particularly at the end of the 19th century, when some of the most forward thinking and progressive physicians were among the most damaging to women and children. And I find that absolutely fascinating, the marvelous intentions that go so terrifically awry. And it's repeated in our own century, of course, right? But that said, Charlotte is very lucky to be to have as her tutor a very young man who is also at first very reluctant to teach a girl. I mean, it's going to destroy his career if it gets out that he's teaching a girl. Oh my God. But he is soon won over by the fact that they have so much in common. Each of them has such a hungry mind, such curiosity. And Charlotte is, I mean, she's such a nerd. She just geeks out on science and math in a huge and infectious, I hope, way. And I had to learn so much because she's so brilliant. I thought, oh my God, I personally I never had any competency with math, but I have a fascination for it. So I had to enter through the point of view of someone for whom math is music and art, you know? And what does that feel like to have a passion for math? And so her intellectual curiosity and all of that, I thought I have to keep up with her, you know? So that was very exciting and really fun. And when he opens her eyes to the fact there have actually been a handful of women who have come before against great odds to make these marks on science, that is even more exciting for her, even though, of course, all her role models are male. And she really deeply doesn't understand that there will be any impediment whatsoever uh, due to her sex, right? She
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't understand how that could stand in her way at all.
One of the things that she sheltered from is that knowledge.
Big time. And then it comes as an immense shock at a number of levels.
The early chapters are also a deep dive into everything in this region that we're set in, the Scottish Marches or the borderlands: food, plants, animals, weather, architectural styles of buildings. Some authors are joyful and enthusiastic researchers. Some people mine out the things that they need to fill a scene. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I have to say I'm joyful, if not, like, I'll just come out right now and say, okay, I totally geek out on things. I kind of can't get enough of it, and I have to hold myself back. And you know,
are there rabbit holes that you intentionally winch yourself out of?
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. It's like a kind of a Bugs Bunny thing. It's like, oh my God, I dove into the earth again, took that left turn at Albuquerque. And I go, I know I'm not supposed to turn left at Albuquerque. I did it again. But there's going to be so many interesting things along the way. But that said, you know what I really try to do, what I always try to do, and certainly what I try to do with this, is immerse the reader in a world with enough cues such that they get the picture in their mind. But to do that, I, as the author, need to choose those details. I need to know what that chair is called and how to describe it. I need to know what it feels like and smells like to walk into that chamber. You know, I need to know what they're eating for lunch, and what is that? You know, what's on the table? The very tactile, immediate, concrete moment to moment experience, right? And then I realized I have to be very specific because I want the reader to feel like they're inside kind of the best, most delicious mini series ever, you know? And sure, I can picture it, but can I describe it? Oh my God, I don't have the vocabulary. I have to find out what this stuff is called. And I have to be very judicious and drop as many things in there such that one detail sets off in the reader's mind a cascade of accompanying details
Mm-hmm.
that they bring to it, you know? So that is the craft of it. And that's what I really, really worked toward, just to put people in the immediate sensual, sensory moment at all times. But you know what I can tell you is that of all the science and the politics and the, oh God, the surgical details, um, you know what was really most challenging for me? The clothes,
The clothes.
especially the women. I mean, I was a kid who drove my mother crazy because I did not want to wear quote unquote girls' clothes. I did not want to wear anything scratchy or tight or anything like, can I have dungarees and high tops?
How comfortable can I make this?
Yeah. And so for me, it was like I always wanted quote unquote boys' clothes. So that's a whole other discussion of gender and
Mm-hmm.
compulsory gendered behavior, right? Which of course that isn't a whole other discussion. That's central. That's key to Fayne, right? What are these what are these categories that we're being shoehorned into, and what's the point of them? Um, but that said, there is, of course, the character of Charlotte's mother, whom we visit. We go into the past, so we go into the romance between her parents. And her mother is an Irish American heiress who loves fashion, loves her clothes. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's her. That's May. It's like she can't have enough flounces and ruffles and ruches and bows and etc. Right? And I thought, oh no, I'm in for it now because clothing is intensely political. Clothing will say so much about character and time and place. And she loves being that ultra, quote unquote, ultra feminine upper class lady. And I thought, I've this is she loves this, therefore I have to love it. I have to get right in here, and I got to put those clothes on with her, and I got to love every second, and I got to know what everything's called so I can invite the reader into her boudoir while she constructs something that is so elaborate and that she's going to wear with such grace and ease, and she's so sexy and beautiful and rich, and she loves it so bad. And of course she's going to travel from that place to a very, very, very different place in the course of the story. So I also need to set that up, right? Because she is going to journey to a place that is very, very different from that place, just to put it mildly.
Do you find that as you're exploring these different these different areas to fill out the scenes that you're setting, do you get pulled in different places in the story as the result of what you're learning?
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, the contrast between May's love of every detail of her hair and all the layers of her clothing and her accessories, the contrast between that sort of scene and then her daughter, who is suddenly compelled to dress in the same way, and for whom these clothes might as well be chains and fetters, right?
Mm-hmm.
What for May is a marvelous outfit is for Charlotte an absolute prison. So that tells us a whole lot right there. But yes, I learned so much about May and her delight and her, you'd call it vanity, right? Because she's very pleased with herself. But I just love her for that because she's just so unapologetically who she is. And I was kind of dragged by her grumbling every step of the way, like I muttering, "Oh my God, how much time do I have to spend in this change room at this department store watching her try on all this goddamn fabric? And now I have to learn the names of it all." I was kind of like that.
Remind me, what is organza again? Which one is that one?
Jesus, yeah, exactly. And I became kind of a reluctant expert on all of this. And I had to laugh at myself too, because I'm still that person. Like you'd see what I'm wearing now, and you go, "That's just about as far from anything May would ever be caught dead in." In fact, she would want to take me in hand for my own good, you know. Um, so I fell in love with her love of herself and her own beauty and her own sexuality, and of course, it's bittersweet to say the least, because she is not only is she following the rules, she exemplifies the rules, right? And she is keeping her side of the bargain.
Mm-hmm.
And she crashes. And yes, there's redemption ultimately. But wow, it's like even when you're perfect, you don't have the power. It's all an illusion of power that she has. The power that she has over her husband and through his title and all. No, 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 no. You know what, sweetheart? He's the baron and you're not, and he owns you and you are chattel. And she's able to be very flirtatious, saying, oh, I'd rather be your chattel than anything in the world. Well, yeah. And you are. You are possessed. You are property. And that's going to end badly. So that, renders poignant and bittersweet. And so for me, I sort of go, oh, just let her have all her nice things for a while, because she's going to go through an ordeal before she comes through the other side.
So you're looking for the best looking gilded cage possible, essentially.
Well, yes, exactly. And also a young woman who I go, yeah, I am also not going to judge her negatively for this. I'm going to say, you go, girl. You know the rules. You're running with it, but oh dear, you actually forgot that you don't have any power. You're actually powerless.
This is the story, in one way, of a prodigy of a girl who loves learning about the natural world as a scientist, an empiricist, but it's also a story set in the Scottish moors, as you say, windswept always. And so we expect a certain amount of gothic mystery, supernatural dread, mad women and attics. Were you thinking about that tradition of gothic fiction?
Absolutely.
And what you could do with it as you put this together?
Gothic fiction is never far from my thoughts. I was about 10 years old when I first read Jane Eyre. And, I was also still immersed in Looney Tunes. What am I saying? I'm still immersed in Looney Tunes and Jane Eyre. These were the kind of probably the twin pillars of my formation as a writer. And that said, the secrets, the sense that there is something that I don't know. And the first step is finding out that there's something I don't know. And then it's like, I'm going to find the truth and I won't rest until I find it. And then that becomes more and more frightening. At one point, Charlotte kind of hears this voice, and the voice says, do you wish to know? And there is always for me, I'm also fascinated by the relationship and the interconnectedness of science, magic, religion, and spirituality, and the shifting filaments among those domains, and the crossover. So, for example, in Jane Eyre, she has this journey where she exiles herself from Mr. Rochester's mansion. And she literally is out there in the wilderness with no food and no shelter. And she does hear a voice calling to her, right? And that always stayed with me because I have personally experienced those in extremis moments. And I have known, and I know there's actually clinical names for it, where you feel there's a guardian or a caring presence. Mm-hmm. Makes its presence known to you, and basically says, you know what, it's going to be okay, or you're actually not alone in this big universe, right? So that kind of message, either from one's own psyche or the world's psyche, or our beautiful planet in all her manifestations, animate and inanimate, whatever you wish to call it, that actually imbues this story, right? Because there is a truth which must out. And Charlotte, with her insatiably curious mind, she says at one point, I was more curious than frightened. And I think that's the triumph, and that's the energy, right? Is if we can keep our curiosity just a bit ahead of our fear, we're going to be okay. So yeah, she's a genius, actually.
We all want to be Charlotte in a way.
We do. And Charlotte also, she is ridiculous too. She's funny because she's also such a literalist in many ways. She doesn't realize she's funny, and she has to learn what a sense of humor is when she gets her first friend who just, thinks that Charlotte is like, oh my God, like you don't even know who and what you are. You're kind of ridiculous, but I kind of love you too. And you need to see something in the world because you don't even know that you're weird.
There is a secret that sits at the heart of this book. And by the heart, I mean in almost the exact center of the book. And it's like a slow motion revelation. You start to sort of put the pieces together over time. And you don't have any problem knowing the first secret that's unearthed in this book.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd love to talk about that, both
Sure.
the secret itself and why you're okay with us knowing that.
Well, first off, I just want to add something a little bit to your Gothic question before we move to
please.
that, if that's okay, Michael. Charlotte is haunted by the ghost of her dead brother. And she's not sure at first if it's a dream or if it's a waking dream or if it's reality. And of course, she poo-poos the idea of Gothic literature because her friend Gwendolen brings her Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, and Charlotte just thinks they're ridiculous. I mean, imagine mistaking. Anyway, she talks about a shrieking wraith at her window, but of course, the scene in the book where Charlotte does see her baby brother's face at her window in the moonlight, and she does thrust her hands through the glass to try to get hold of this wraith or to push it away, is of course inspired by Wuthering Heights. So yes, she's haunted by her dead brother who's a baby. Now, is there anything scarier than a baby ghost?
Nothing. The comedy that sits on the other side is Charlotte's distaste for the Bronte sisters, while she is literally sitting in the middle of a Gothic novel. It's kind of fantastic.
Yeah, she's dealing with Gothic phenomena, and she is looking down on Gothic literature.
This is
ridiculous.
Rubbish.
It's not scientific. It's absolute rubbish. And of course, everything could be explained away. So thank you for appreciating that irony. And I think it is funny too. But yes, there is a core secret in the middle of the book, and there are kind of reverberative ripple effect secrets that come out from that, right? There are the layers of secrets. But the first revelation comes, I think it comes out, it's like maybe around page 75, 78, not to put too fine a point on it. But that has to do with the fact that Charlotte was born with what we would in many quarters would now be referred to as a quote intersex trait, unquote. And in her, it takes the form of a part of her anatomy which she calls the prickle, and it's a clitoris, and it just happens to be larger than average. But she doesn't think this is unusual at all. She thinks all girls have one. And this is just the reader discovers this aspect of Charlotte's personhood, along with every other aspect of Charlotte's personhood. We're in her bath, and she is very scientific, and therefore she's going to tell the reader, well, I took this and the sponge with that, and then this part of my body, and then of course that part of my body, and here's how she relates to that. And before the reader knows it, they are privy to something which Charlotte doesn't understand is unusual, right? So that was very important for me to invite the reader into Charlotte's normalcy, because Charlotte is normal, because variations of bodies is normal, and this is something about which I feel very, very adamant and passionate about the spectrum of what is normal in terms of our bodies and our identities, and why there has been the pretense of scientific or medical objectivity, but all it is a tool. It's a tool of cultural enforcement of what is deemed to be normal, right, by mainstream culture, or by whatever authority, or by a kind of a paternalistic or patriarchal culture, right? Who who gets to be normal and who is pathologized? You know, what was it like in the mid 70s before homosexuality was removed from the World Health Organization's list of diseases, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I came of age during a time when my parents, one of their only regrets when I first came out was that I hadn't come out sooner while I was still a minor, so that they could have gotten me quote unquote help. You know,
Uh-huh.
so
Right.
I go, oh, there I dodged that cannonball, you know. But that's why for me, it's not a spoiler, right? Because it's her body. It's normal. It's it's unusual, but it's normal. And I very much want to invite the reader to identify with Charlotte, to cherish all of her. That's why I don't treat it as a spoiler,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not fetishizing. I'm not fetishizing her body part. She's not exotic. She's not. This is not an exotic um, kind of. Well, basically, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to exoticize someone because of their body. I'm going to say, here she is. Everybody else has got a problem. She has a problem because they do, not because she's a problem. And she doesn't understand. When we meet her whole body, she has yet to understand
Mm-hmm.
that the world is going to make a very, very, very big problem for her out of it.
As you say, the other secrets reverberate from there. And do you get a certain kind of joy as an author in the construction of that unfolding?
Well, there's story, right? Which is, oh, there's so much joy in that. You know, um, when I discovered what the story was, that's really joyful. And I go, oh, yeah, oh, I love this, is amazing. And then there's plotting. And oh my goodness, that's where the work and the craft comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Because the plotting is all about how how are we, i.e. the reader, how are we going to find out these secrets? In what order? Through whose point of view? Which characters are in possession of what amount of the truth at any given moment? What does each of them believe, and what do they believe the others believe? Right. So that's the really tricky thing. And for me, like I make up stories, and then I go, oh God, a poor kid like me, I was never good at math, and plotting is math. It's spatial relationships, right? Because if this, then that. If that, then this, right? And setting up the interconnected web of event, and which of course is a metaphor for what I'm trying to write about all the time anyway, which is our interconnectedness with one another and the planet and everything in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we are a web, and you touch it anywhere and there's reverberations everywhere. So plotting that, and okay, I'll give you an example. I have to be highly competent at craft, and I think at this point I've had a good deal of practice, and I am diligent, and I do my utmost to make a seamless, immersive experience for the reader. So I hesitate to tell everyone just how hard I work at it. But I because there are these layers of secrets, and some people who know a piece of the truth, and other people who have a different piece. I On one part of my brain, like, I'm really smart and I'm figuring this out. The other part of me stays really stupid and gullible. And that is also part and parcel, I know, of what an artist has to be, right? Whether I'm an actor or a writer, I have to stay available to surprise. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of my job, right? So, otherwise known as gullible. I can't tell you how often through the course of writing, plotting this book, I actually fell for the lie. And I have to go, no, 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 no. That's the lie. No, no, no. That didn't
Right.
happen then. That happened then. Okay. And I actually had to write out over and over again on recipe cards and stick them on a bulletin board in front of my eyes to remind myself of the true timeline. That's the true timeline right there. Okay. Everything else is a version of a lie. But I was so dumb. I was so stupid so often. I was like, oh my God, I've tricked myself. But then I go, okay, if I believed that, that's great. That means it's really believable. And that's what I'm going for. But I just can't fall for it.
On one hand, I can completely see plotting as math. On the other hand, plotting is also a manipulation of time and putting things in time.
You just nailed it. Yeah.
And I wonder, like, are you reaching or kind of using those same muscles that you use as a playwright, which is like a much more deliberate management and manipulation of a very fixed period of time? Or is that a whole different sort of set of narrative muscles that you go to?
It's not different. It's just it's the same world of tools,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you say time and sequence, really you've hit on it. And often I'm writing, where there's secrets, there is trauma. And where there is trauma, there is exploded sequence, there is exploded time, and there is the challenge of resequencing, right? Because that's what you do to recover from trauma over and over and over again. You resequence and you go, that's not happening now, that happened then, right? This little shard, which is interrupting my experience of the present moment, isn't part of this present moment. It's a relic, a vestige, and it belongs elsewhere. So when I'm constructing a plot and there is trauma at the center of it and time has exploded, it is like all picking up all these shards and fragments and trying to put them back in order over and over again. And that's what the characters are trying to do. And I know from personal experience that that's what I have to do for mental wellness and my own wellness. I won't say mental wellness, say my own wellness, because I often have physical repercussions from the things that I'm working on. Right, it works it out literally through my own body, not just my psyche. So I understand. I have an intimate eye view of what it means to face the challenge of sequencing. And so I try to bring both that vulnerability and that difficulty and that hard won expertise to plotting, right? Because I know that these characters are dealing with trying to keep their lives literally in order. So I know that just sounded rather esoteric, but these are the things which feel very concrete to me, and I turn them into concrete story.
We're constantly reminded through Fayne about this idea of incomplete understanding combined with rock solid certainty. Charlotte is well grounded in the classical philosophers who do an excellent job of describing the world, but maybe our view of the world has refined since then. The tutor who arrives, Mr. Margallo, is up to date on the latest natural philosophy of the time. But we as the reader know the gap between that science and the present day. Is there a part of Fayne that's all about being cautious about certainty, about assuming you have the whole story?
Well, yes, because I think this period, the late 19th century, is the last hurrah of certainty. Because very early on in the century, of course, Einstein's going to publish his theory of his special theory of relativity, et cetera. And Planck, Ken Schrodinger, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Certainty is going to come apart. And time, speed, matter and energy are going to be shown to be one and the same and two very different things. And we can never know anything with certainty ever again, right, at the quantum level. So all of that certainty is about to disintegrate. And of course, it doesn't come out of nowhere. Einstein doesn't go for a stroll one day, and it comes out of the blue. These ideas have been germinating for a long time. I mean, it goes back to Lucretius. But for example, James Clerk Maxwell, right? He was the Scottish scientist who's also talked about in the book, who was very close to describing wave particle physics, and he couldn't quite do it. There were a lot of people who were onto this idea of you can either know where something is or you can know what something is. Is light a wave or a particle? How can it be both at the same time? How can one thing be in two places simultaneously? What is spooky action at a distance, I think is what Einstein called it. The idea that an atom, for lack of a particle here, a change in a particle here affects another particle across the universe. Now, how does that happen? And it does happen. It's scientifically proven that it does happen. And then there's the mysteries of epigenetics, which just seems like child's play compared to all that weird stuff. But the certainty, right? And then, of course, Dr. Chambers saying we're going to create certainty. Nature's lines are blurred, and that's going to drag us back. We're going to devolve as a species. There's eugenics. It's the rise of eugenics at this time as well, which is going in an opposite direction to the uncertainty, right? Eugenics wants to create certainty because it is certain of what and who is superior in terms of race and sex, etc., right? Uncertainty is saying, no, variation and uncertainty is the way of nature, and that's our salvation. That's the way of the world, right? And of course, both extremes are probably going to meet at some point. But the idea that we can be certain who is male, who is female, and how they should behave depending on what class they're in, and also the invention of race, right, and the invention of racial differences, and et cetera. We'd call it racial profiling now, or just plain old racism. All of that, all of these strict categories, which are gasps toward a certainty, which is in fact our enemy, right?
There were parts of this book that feel almost written to be read aloud. There are passages in dialect. There are characters who mishear or misremember, listen to accents they can't understand, and some really fantastic dialogue and back and forth exchanges. I've heard you say before that being a playwright and being a novelist kind of come from a similar place to you, in that there's an audience on the other end that's always receiving. I'm interested in how that extends to how you hear your characters, how you imagine their speech or their exchanges as they're going down onto the page.
Well, I think there's not a line that I've ever written in a novel that I haven't spoken aloud before I'm satisfied with it, because I always feel like something has to work rhythmically. There's a shorter route, I think, between the ear and the soul or the heart than there is between the eye and the core of oneself, right? Between the eye and the heart. If language is alive and the rhythm, the meaning of it, the meaning of words resides in the rhythm as well as the literal meaning, right? That's why so often, if a character uses, quote unquote, big words with Latin and French Romance language roots, that's going to say one thing about that character. And then there are going to be characters, and many places in the book, where a kind of older Anglo-Saxon Germanic choices are made, that I make, right? Words of fewer syllables, automatopoeic words that sound like what they are, and like cow, earth. That's even. I mean, okay. Let's not digress into etymology, but but yes, rhythm is integral to meaning. Mm-hmm. Well, there has to be the right kind of music and the right kind of rhythm, and sometimes there are characters who you just know they are resisting rhythm, They are suppressing rhythm in order to insist upon rational meaning and rational meaning alone. And of course, that too is a passionate choice. That too is an emotional choice, much as that person might be trying to drain emotion out of everything by suppressing rhythm and being only precise in their language. So yeah, I don't think a book works unless it works on the ear. And I'm actually having a chance to kind of revisit that now because I'm in the midst of recording the audiobook of Fayne. And so yes, there are all these accents, and I'm trying to give a little flavor of each, without going overboard and making it into a kind of a distraction for the listener. One just wants a flavor. So yes, it's rhythm, and that tells you so much about what's going on and about who it is who's speaking. Even when it's the book speaking, sometimes the book speaks in a very lyrical, very emotional, impassioned way. And sometimes it speaks in a really clinical way. And that will tell you a lot about where we're at in the story,
The other media you work in, acting, theater, time you spent in film and television, those are all capital-intensive, largely collaborative arts, where a lot of people have to want something to happen in order for it to happen. Is there a freedom to sitting down to write a novel?
Yes. I mean, I get to be in charge of all the toys. It's true. That said, I find the two media really nourish one another, because spending years alone in a great big world, for example, spending years making Fayne and not really being able to share that with anyone. At a certain point, I'm able to share it with my editor, and I go, thank God. But it's true with theater. It's so much more. It's collaborative from the get-go, and there are workshops, and then there are rehearsals, and it's alive, and I'm writing it on the fly, and I'm writing in response to the staging, and I'm partnering with the director, the actors, the designers, the technicians, and it is marvelously social. And I love that. I just, I was parched for it when it came time to go to Stratford last spring and start working on Hamlet 911. Yes, it was a great relief. I felt I'm back in the land of the living. I'm no longer alone with. I'm not alone, but I'm the only kind of creature like me in this big fictional world of Fayne, right? And it's not like I can go out for drinks with my collaborators afterwards and say, "Oh, hey, well, how about that moment? What should we do here?" No.
Ann-Marie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Michael, you've been so kind. Thank you very much for the time and for sharing me with your readers and sharing your readers with me. I really appreciate it.
I have been speaking with Ann-Marie MacDonald. Her new novel is Fayne. Find it and the other books we've talked about at kobo.com/conversation. There's a link in the show notes. Subscribe to Kobo in Conversation wherever you're listening to us now so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review or stars or anything else that lets us know you're out there. It helps other book-loving people find our show. Kobo in Conversation is produced by Nathan Maharaj and hosted by me, Michael Tamlin. Thank you for listening.